I'd like to start by paying my respects to the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the lands upon which I am meeting you from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. A couple of quick housekeeping tips before we keep going. We'll just need to flag that this session is being recorded and will be made available online. I also ask that you all please mute your microphone for this session, but that we really do encourage questions. So if you have questions as we go through, please just pop them into the chat function, and the lovely Aidan from SIMNA Western Australia is going to jump in and help us bring those questions to our lovely panel members. So don't feel like you can't do that, but do please put the microphone on mute for now. Before I bring you to our fantastic panel today, I just wanted to quickly touch on why Western Sydney focus and why do we have a SIMNA Western Sydney as well. So in a real nutshell, Western Sydney is a unique region and a very large region. And my lovely colleague Christina told me to remind everyone it's not just Parramatta, it's a really big geographical region. It's the third largest economy in Australia, with one of the fastest growing populations. About 1 in 11 Australians approximately currently live in Western Sydney. And it's incredibly diverse place. There's over 100 languages spoken, about 35% of the population are born overseas. And it's, for me, one of the best places in the world to work and be involved in. There's a lot on the horizon for the region. And in that context, there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of challenges around measuring social impact in this region. So this is a big reason for why we have SIMNA Western Sydney. So why, moving right along, why this session? I know for me personally, I've worked in Penrith for about 5.5 years and have been involved in hundreds of community and cultural events in that time. On a personal note, and I think it's fair to say for all of us, we're all probably really missing them now that we've had a period of time when they've been restricted, and have probably all felt the value that they hold now that we're not able to go ahead with them as freely as normal. So today, I guess, is really about looking at that value and looking at how we actually go about measuring the social impact. Sometimes that's, the measurement of events is more focused on the economics, but what about the social aspect also? So that's what our panel are here to do today to support us with. So what I'm going to do is, rather than introduce them myself, I'm actually going to jump straight in and ask them to introduce themselves to you. So I'm going to start with you, Maria. Would you please briefly introduce yourself to our audience today?
Hi everyone, I'm Maria. I'm the Senior Quantitative Researcher at City of Parramatta Council. I've been at Parramatta Council for almost 2 years now, and prior to that I worked at market research agencies doing mostly consumer research. As a quant researcher, my day-to-day involves a lot of survey design and data analysis. I sit within the research and insights team, which consists of 4 people, and we work with a mini agency-like approach. So teams across council can come to us with their research problems, and we'll help them to solve, get to the bottom of their issue, normally through survey design or sometimes through qualitative approaches like focus groups.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maria. And Elizabeth, were you able to introduce yourself to our audience today and tell us a little bit about you?
Thank you, Leila. My name's Elizabeth Schaffer and I'm the Director of Training for Change. My own pathway into evaluation has come really through a long career working in community development projects, education projects and counselling, and qualitative insights, learning from people about what is happening for them, why it's happening, what could change, has really been the reason why I've become involved in evaluation. Because if you're working on a community development project or an education project, you really need to know and learn from the people who you're doing it for what's actually happening. So that's been very much my pathway into this work. And today I'm here representing or talking about my work for the Refugee Camp in My Neighbourhood, which I'll talk more about later.
Awesome, thank you. And Elizabeth and Maria bring a real wealth of knowledge and value in this space. So it's really, very different approaches, and I'm really excited to hear more from both of you. So I think the best place to start for today is just setting the scene for everyone a little bit and getting a sense of the types of work that you do. So I would start with you, Maria, if that's okay. Would you be able to briefly share with us why the City of Parramatta is interested in measuring the impact of cultural events in the community?
Yeah, sure. So Parramatta Council, we host a really wide range of cultural events, and they really vary in scale. We've got really large events like Parramatta Lanes, Winter Light every year, where lots of locals come, but they also bring a lot of people from outside the LGA to Parramatta. There's other events and programs that are run by Riverside Theatre and the National Theatres, Heritage Centre. They do educational tours. Parramatta Artist Studios, they have a program, residency program for artists. I mean, there's a lot going on, and all these events and programs, they're guided by Council's cultural plan and community strategic plan. And because I'm in the office today, I actually have them just here. But these plans, all these events, they link up to these plans. And within these plans, there are strategic goals that set out Council's vision of the city and what we're trying to achieve. So measurement is quite important to check that the events and programs that we have in place are actually effective, that they're well received, and they're contributing to those strategic goals positively. And secondly, if we can demonstrate that our events and programs are having a positive effect, I think that's quite important to show that we do need continued or increased funding for these programs and cultural assets.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. Elizabeth, I'm going to take it over to you and ask, you're here to tell us a little bit more about the Refugee Camp in My Neighbourhood project. Why is impact measurement a prominent feature of this event?
Well, just to set the scene, the event has taken place in an LGA that has the highest proportion of asylum seekers in the country, or the highest number of asylum seekers in the country. And 52% of the population of the LGA was born overseas. So it's an enormously culturally diverse LGA. The project was started by the community development team in Auburn and then Cumberland City Council. And from the very beginning, the aim of the project was to be involved directly with community, to involve those different ethnic and refugee communities in the council area in every aspect of developing the project. So, the aims of the project were to broadly to educate people about to help people learn more about why and how refugees come to this country and what it's like to be a refugee, but also to increase connectedness between people in those communities and across those communities with the broader Australian community. So there's no way you can do that without actually measuring what's actually happening for people. And the process of evaluation started right from the beginning, when a process of community consultation was undertaken by the community development team. And that's been what's informed all of the evaluation and the development of the program since the beginning. And so the project has evolved in a very organic way that's directly related to the communications that have been taking place and all of the trust that's been part of that, which is what Council had already started building up.
Amazing.
So, no, it's sort of like an essential, it's at the core of the project, that kind of evaluation.
Yeah, the why is front and centre. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to move us into the how section, because I think this is the juicy part for people and the part people always want to know more about. So again, Maria, I'll start with you. How do you go about measuring the social impact of the cultural and events programs, and what methods and techniques have you found to be most effective?
Sure, so I thought I might go over 2 examples today. In the research team, the events that we evaluate most consistently are the major events. So these are the large scale events like Parramatta Lanes, Winter Light, Australia Day. we actually get an external agency to conduct face-to-face interviews over the course of the event. And we ask pretty much the same questions from event to event. So the advantage is that the results, we have them all in an online dashboard, and we're able to compare the events side by side. We've found that face-to-face is quite effective because people are very happy to participate on the day. But I guess the obvious drawback here is at cost. It is quite expensive to get an external agency to do these interviews. And if it was just the research team like doing these interviews, we just don't have the capacity to get the same amount of numbers. The questions that we ask, I have to admit, is not very outcomes focused. The purpose of these evaluations have been to give event producers feedback that they need to, improve events a second time round. So we ask very standard questions like asking people to rate their overall experience, how likely they are to recommend the event to family and friends, how much they spend, what were their favourite parts of the event, that sort of stuff. So as I mentioned, it's not very impact focused. I think the challenge for us is that these face-to-face surveys, we're trying to limit them to 5 minutes. And after we ask these questions and the demographic stuff that we want to cover, there's just not a lot of space left. So it's definitely something that we're trying to improve. I thought I might speak about something that we have been doing for a while now, but earlier this year, Council became a partner of the White Box program. And I'm not sure if many people here have heard of this before, but it's an initiative that's run by the Cultural Development Network. And they really focus on cultural outcomes measurement. Essentially, what White Box is an online planning and evaluation tool. And it includes a schema of outcomes across a number of domains. So like economic, social, environmental, and cultural. And the way it works is that when you set up a new project, at the outset, you have to select the outcomes that you're wanting to achieve. And White Box actually, within the tool, they have a full list of outcomes that you can select from. So for example, recently, one of our teams, Parramatta Artist Studios, they ran a full-day online event called Movers and Makers that was aimed at artists. And one of the outcomes that they wanted to hit was creative stimulated. On the platform, it gives you a short explanation and a detailed explanation of what creative stimulated means, and includes all of the academic foundations and also a sample question that you might want to use in your evaluations. So what we found was that the sample that they had provided wouldn't really work for a feedback survey that we wanted to program, because we just wanted something that was quite short and snappy. I've actually written down what the explanation is. So creative stimulated in White Box, the short definition is defined as sparking of imagination, creativity or curiosity that leads to a desire for creative expression. So in this scenario, what we did was that we broke up this statement into a number of shorter rating statements for inclusion in a feedback survey. So the rating statements that we had were just very basic. It was like, from this experience, did you find it to be thought-provoking? Give a rating from 0 to 10. Did it inspire you to create, or did it inspire you to seek out similar experiences? And that's how I went about going to measure, what was creative stimulated. The great thing about White Box is that at the end of the project, White Box is not a survey tool, but you can enter all of your survey data in it. So at the end of a project, the event producer, they would record these survey results within the platform, and they can also include other activity data that they might have. So in this scenario, it might be the number of participants at the event, or the number of works that were commissioned as a result. And you can even add in your personal reflections. So what we get is everything about the project, including activity descriptions, and evaluations all in the one place. For us at council, the goal will be for all teams that have cultural events to plan and evaluate using the white box platform. So in the end, we'll have all of our outcome measures in the one place. And a great thing is that users are actually able to see how others have evaluated and the outcomes of that. So then you can compare and see how your project compared.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. That's a really awesome snapshot of some really interesting detail there. And I know in chatting to you prior to today that, sometimes it's about taking quite conceptual things and finding ways to ask those questions of community that actually make sense to community. And I think that that's really important. And probably a good segue into some of the approaches that Elizabeth has taken in terms of the Refugee Camp project. So I'll kind of take it back over to you, Elizabeth, and just ask, how have you gone about measuring the social impact of that project? And I guess what methods and techniques have been effective for that?
Okay, so I think it's important to say that right from the beginning, there was never one side evaluating the project, but it was more like a circle of inclusion in a way. So that circle involved the council and the CD team. It involved the people in the local refugee communities who took part from the beginning in the development of the project. It included the tour guides who were themselves people from asylum seeker backgrounds or refugee backgrounds who were recruited through the process. It included all of the visitors to the project, which included schools, which included general public, which included health workers and other professionals. It included volunteers working for council, and it included project partners, so people like the House of Welcome and the Refugee Advice Casework Service and STARTS, which is a service for torture and trauma survivors in Sydney. So there was, from the beginning, two kinds of evaluation. There was formal evaluation, but there was also what I think of as ongoing evaluation, which was the relationship and the continuing ways of communicating between council and those different people in that circle. So that might be regular meetings with particular community groups that happen. When the project started, which was in 2014, there were a number of surveys, and they were written surveys that were carried out. So the council, I wasn't involved in the evaluation at that time. I was doing training, but there were surveys of all of the visitors. Teachers filled it out, not students, and other visitors. It asked questions like before and after questions. Before you came to the tour, what was your level of knowledge about the reasons why people flee their country? After you were at the tour, and regarding conditions in refugee camps, before, did you have any knowledge? Did you have some knowledge? Did you have a high level of knowledge? After the tour, same question. And people were asked to fill out those surveys. There were surveys for partners, there were surveys for tour guides. Some of those surveys were followed up after 3 months or after 1 month, or there was an attempt at following that up to try and get some kind of ongoing input about change, because measuring change is what this was all about. In 2015, that's when I started getting involved in the evaluation, and we did a long-term evaluation looking back over the first 5 years to see what had happened. And that and to also formulate an ongoing way of measuring what had happened for everybody involved in that circle. So we rationalised the visitor survey, and we started to include school students in that. So high school students and not just their teachers then started filling it in, which was fantastic really, because first of all, that was a large number of responses from people who may themselves have really known very little about the issues before they came. We did in-depth interviews with all of the people in that circle. So we did in-depth interviews with the tour guides, with the partners, with visitors, with teachers, and we were able to then collect those responses. The survey, included scaling questions, 5 scaling questions, but also open-ended questions. And the 3 open-ended questions were all about what has changed for you, what made that change happen, and as the result of that change, what will happen now as a result of taking part in the project. And we codified those responses, and what we ended up getting was a very rich and nuanced insight into what the experience of that project was for everybody, not just for the people who came to learn about the refugee experience, but for example, and in particular, the tour guides themselves. And all of that we were then able to look at against the original aims and objectives of the project. So in particular for the tour guides, it provided everybody in that circle with a really deep insight into what had happened through that project, and with also ideas about how to continue to adjust what happened in the project. And in terms of the aims and objectives of council and the community development principles, the way that the evaluation was used and was shared further enhanced those original principles. So it's not just that somebody came along and asked you questions and then went and wrote a report, but as part of that circle, we asked those questions, then we shared what resulted from that with everybody. And for people who had come to Australia as asylum seekers who had said, I've always been frightened to tell people about my experience. I don't want Australians to know that I'm an asylum seeker. To read the responses of people about what they learned and how it changed their ideas about what seeking asylum means, for example, was a profoundly empowering experience. And so that in itself really strengthened the original aims and objectives of the project. Yeah, that's kind of the broad picture, really. Is there
a really powerful example, thank you, Elizabeth, of kind of a bit of co-design and inclusion, and that code and that measurement is an iterative process. It's not just before and after, it's a journey that you can keep coming back and checking and making sure it's taking you somewhere, because you know we often say there's no point in collecting all the data if you don't do anything with it, right? So yeah, very, very powerful example, I think. Yeah, I can see here that we do have some questions that have come through. I think, you know, you've both left a lot of food for thought for people, I think. And so I might just flick over to Aidan, who might have a look and shoot some questions over to our panelists.
Hey folks, they've been coming in thick and fast. I'm glad we don't have a shy crowd tonight. Going to kick us off. This is, we'll go to you first, Maria. This is a question from Max asking about assuming the council pays for the measurement work that you do and the data collation, and if that's true, could you explain a little bit about how do you justify your value as a research team to the higher ups?
Yeah, sure. So we do, for that particular, for major events, we do get external to come in and do all the field work for us, but there are a lot of projects where there just simply isn't the budget. So in that scenario, our team would help the client team essentially design the research. And in some cases, if they don't have the capacity to carry it out, we will actually run the full project for them. I guess the benefit of having a research team as well is even with those projects that we do get an external to do, we are a point of contact with them and we'll help the client team interpret the research insights that come out.
Oh, fabulous. And one more for you, Maria. Regarding interviews at key events, are you able to sort of extrapolate out that data into additional trends, observations and insights? Could you tell us a little bit about what you've learned from the data that you're collecting around those events?
Sure. So we don't actually really look at trended data a lot, but we have the capacity to do this with the online dashboard. What we normally do is look for key issues that might have come out of a particular event. So was it that things were too expensive? I mean, that sort of feedback will come back pretty much straight away. It's very clear. And then we will, I guess, action those insights to improve future events.
Great, amazing. I'm going to flip it to you, Elizabeth, and I'm going to abuse my privilege as the question asker to insert one of my own in first. I'd love for you to share a little bit about, you mentioned that beautiful question around like what changed for you. I love those sort of open-ended qualitative questions. How do you actually go about codifying that data? How do you turn it into something, you know, themes or whatnot?
Well, first of all, it's very time consuming, but very valuable, I think. So, for example, you know, the questions were really, has anything changed for you in relation to from this experience in relation to your knowledge, feelings and beliefs? Which aspect of the tour changed it? And in relation to supporting refugees, is there anything you plan to do or change? So when we looked at, a volunteer group working through council actually transcribed all of those responses. We then went through those responses and were able fairly easily to put them into different categories and codify them. So for example, has anything changed for you, your knowledge, feelings, beliefs as a result of the tour experience? Really, we found in the 2019 surveys that people's responses fell into 3 categories. They felt they knew more, they had a higher awareness of refugee issues, they had an increased empathy and insight into refugee issues, and they had felt moved to take some advocacy action. So we looked at each question and really we were able to, it wasn't hard to actually see different comments falling into those different categories. And at the same time as that though, you get that alongside the comments that people put. So, you know, you've got, that's how you codify it, but you've also got the nuance in a way that comes from a statement rather than simply a box ticked.
Great. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions from Christina and Margaret, and this is for you again, Elizabeth. So we know mixed method techniques are very powerful. How do you kind of time them with respect to interviews, before, after, during? Do you find it makes a difference? And then little addendum to that, do you do your surveys written, orally, and do you do them in language? So if you could just extrapolate a bit about how all that works together, that would love it.
Okay. In terms of the written surveys are all in English, and for the visitors. So, and all of the visitors are English speaking, and all of the tour guides themselves are English speaking. In terms of the getting feedback from local community groups, in interviews, there would be interpreters in situations where that's required. But for the actual written surveys, they're all in English, and that's been appropriate for the particular people who've taken part. What was the other part of the question? The first part you said.
So the other part is around how you combine the surveys with the. Yeah.
Okay. So as I said, the whole thing, there's a giant circle, this process. There's at no point was the evaluation separate from the rest of the process. So, you know, the very beginning of the process involved the CD team involving what was then the Centre for Refugee Research at UNSW, to do storyboarding with all of the different communities in the area, the different refugee communities, about what they wanted to be included in the tour. Then that was developed into the tour. There was further consultation with those communities about, is this what you wanted? Is this what we thought it should be? And that was included, what came back from that. Then those particular communities, after the first year that had happened and after each year, are then consulted. They get the results of what happened, they see it, and then they are interviewed or have written the survey about what happened. As far as the timing, for example, with the tour guides, and in a way the tour guides, the interviews with tour guides and the feedback from tour guides has been really important for the whole project, because they are the people that it's all about. They are people who have come to Australia as refugees or are currently seeking asylum. they are asked at the beginning about their reasons for wanting to take part. That's part of the recruitment process. And then after the tours, after the project finishes each year, they're interviewed about what has happened for them. And in 2015, we did very detailed, lengthy recorded interviews with people where they talked about what had happened for them, what they had thought beforehand, what they had expected, what had actually happened. And we also used that information to, we quantified that information too. And yeah, so, and then also there's follow-up as well. So one of the things that happened in 2015 was we were able to follow up with schools, with teachers in particular who had brought their schools in previous years, and explore over time what the impact of the visit was. And that is very important, but also rather hard to get.
Fabulous, comprehensive, detailed, and amazing. Keep the questions coming in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but I'm going to flick it back to Lila for the next section.
Thank you, Aidan. Yes, we will keep going, and it's only really to touch more on what's already been spoken about, the challenges. And I like to say to people all the time, there is just no one way or one perfect way to do this work. And so there's multiple ways and multiple communities, and they're all very different. So there's bound to be challenges as we go. So Maria, I wanted to go back to you and ask, what are some of the challenges that you faced in measuring the social impact of events and programs that you've spoken about? And I suppose any tips that you might have for managing these challenges?
Sure. So I guess the first challenge is a practical challenge, in that because of COVID, you know, a lot of these major events are not happening anymore, or they've had to adapt and go online. And with that, you know, the evaluation will need to change as well. We haven't quite figured that out exactly yet, but I guess if I were to think of a tip, one of them, and this is a fairly basic one, is that if you can get participants for your event to register or to provide their details in some way, for example, through Eventbrite, that is a really useful touch point, and you can come back to them at the end of the event and ask them to provide feedback. I think one of our biggest challenges is getting the participation. For a face-to-face event, people don't usually say no to doing a 5-minute interview, but with online, especially if you're not sending your feedback straight after, people might not click into your link and they might not do your survey. Tied to that, I guess, is just a bit of the next challenge is actually with these feedback, if we're going to do an online feedback survey, it is just to keep it short. And that can be quite a challenge if we're wanting to measure quite a lot of things. I think for some programs, if they're longer term projects where you are quite involved, people will be open to answering more questions, and you might be able to do a depth interview as well. But if it's a half-day, 2-hour program, we're not going to be able to get people's attention for very long. So as I mentioned before, our event face-to-face surveys are only 5 minutes. And I would imagine that when we do bring them online, they'll be even shorter. The Parramatta Artist Studio example that I provided before for movers and makers, that survey is only 3 minutes long. And I guess the tricky thing is, in that 3 minutes, you need to figure out what is most important to ask. And I guess finally, the last challenge I would think of, and it's probably the biggest one, is actually getting your measures right. I think it's important that you have to be open to changing it up. So it might be finessing the wording, or it could actually be changing the outcome. So for example, and I'll refer back to that movers and makers example, that was a 1-day workshop. One of our outcomes was to improve social connection, and we had a survey question in there about, you know, whether, you know, you improved your sense of the community or something like that. But then on reflection, it was a 1-day workshop with like a lot of little events, and people were not in it for the full day. In retrospect, I think we thought maybe it's not the best, social connection is not the best outcome for this kind of thing, and it would be a more suitable outcome for a program that runs over a longer period of time. So I think, yeah, the main challenge is it will take several attempts probably to get it right, and not to be stuck on whatever that you put in place in the first place.
Thank you, Maria. That's a really good one. It's iterative. You can't be asking questions that don't relate to the outcomes, because it kind of will take you down a different track, and it is important to keep them up front as well. So that's a really good reminder for when developing these types of evaluation frameworks. Elizabeth, I'm going to take the same question over to you now and ask you, what for the Refugee Camp in My Neighbourhood project, what were some of the challenges in measuring the impact, and I suppose any tips that you kind of can share around addressing those?
Well, I think whenever you're doing a written survey, one of the challenges, whatever it is that you want to avoid people just saying what they think you want them to say, or just ticking a box, tick, tick, tick. And also because the content, taking part in the tour is not easy. It's quite emotional. It's quite confronting for many people. And even though looking after each other is a really important part of the process of going on the tour, it can be difficult. And what we find is people are quite shocked by what they hear. What we decided to do with the survey was to include it as part of the tour. So filling it out is not something you give people a piece of paper and then they leave and fill it out, but that it's part of the tour, and it's the last stop, and it's a debriefing stop. And for the last few years, we were running it. I was running it. People would take the questions, those 5 scaling questions and the 3 open-ended questions about what change had happened. You explain to them why we were collecting the information, and just a thank you to everybody for taking part. So it's setting a scene in a way, a kind of a nurturing environment, and then asking people, had they had any questions or comments about the whole tour, checking that they're okay. And usually people are quite quiet through that. They don't say much. And then you give them the time to fill in the form before you say, now it's finished. And it's amazing to see how people write so much detail about the experience when they're sitting there and they have the time. And there would be many times where I think, oh, this is a group that really hasn't got much to say, or they haven't found it very interesting, or it hasn't meant much to people. The group sits there and the room goes quiet, dead quiet, and people fill in the survey. And when they leave, you just read extraordinary responses. And that gave us the scaled questions and the detail that we then were able to codify. And I just think that, you know, we also found trying to get ongoing input was very difficult. Even though that would be a wonderful thing to know about the lasting impact, it's much harder to get. But those surveys done like that, with people given the time to do it and explained why we're doing it and why it's important, really did produce a lot of valuable information. In terms of the longer term, one of the things that emerged really strongly is that certain teachers, schools ended up being the most important, or certainly the largest audience for the refugee camp in My Neighbourhood, and teachers would bring schools back year after year. So there was, initially there was an attempt at trying to get back 3-month surveys from teachers, but that's very hard to do. They're very busy, you know, once they've gone, they've gone. However, those schools that kept coming back presented a possibility for partnering with the school. So actually saying, this is a teacher who's directly, you know, involved in sort of supporting the aims and the objectives of this project, and what can that person tell us about what's happened in their school. And when we went to teachers in the 2000 and in the longitudinal study, we got extraordinary stories of what they had observed in their own schools about the children's experience, what changed for them, the parents of the children being contacted by parents saying they were, how they had been affected by their child's participation in the project. So having that ongoing relationship, even with a small selection of schools, gives you another view, I think, into the impact.
That's a wonderful example, Elizabeth. And I think a really big challenge for measuring the impact of events is that they're very limited in time. You know,
yeah,
few events go for 7 hours. You know, they're often very time limited. And
yeah.
I love the point about integrating the survey as part of the event. I think that's very clever. And I think there's a great learning for all of us in there around, you know, you're not always going to be able to follow up with everyone. It's just not possible resourcing wise, but who are the people that you might be able to do that with? And that may be services, it may be particular, as you said, schools, but maybe others as well that you might actually be able to do it with to check back down the line. I think that's excellent. Now we've got a lot of questions coming in thick and fast, and I think one of the key things for today is we simply don't have time to quite reach all of the many elements of this topic, and it's great to see the interest, so thank you for these. I will, before we wrap up, I will go back over to Aidan to just try and we'll spend about 5-10 minutes trying to get through a few of yours, and then we'll wrap up. So I wanted to say thank you for, I'm reading them all on the side going, oh, these are excellent questions. So Aidan, I'll flick over to you again.
Great, yes. So we've touched on it in a few ways, but I'd love to hear from both of you. And this comes from Amy right down the bottom. I think it's a key one. Given you both work with highly diverse communities, what strategies have you used to ensure that your collection and measurement is culturally sensitive and appropriate? Let's maybe try and get a tight minute from each of you on this one so we can move through the questions.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. For our major event surveying, where we get the interviewers on the ground, we do get an agency that have field staff that can speak different languages. So if someone is unable to do a survey in English, they will take them through the survey in language and cater to them that way. For other surveys, if we do want to target a particular group, we will translate and survey and do it in language. Or for qualitative research, for example, we might reach out to external recruiters who will help us to target particular groups.
Cool. And can we also hear from Elizabeth?
So in relation to council, and I'm not part of council, but thinking about that circle of people involved in this project, that really has to do with the council and the CD team's long-standing development of relationships with all the different communities in that council. And in terms of people who visited the project, visited the tour, took a tour, there were, in terms of language, the tour guides themselves spoke many different languages. I don't think we've ever had a visitor to the project that wasn't able to speak to one of the tour guides in a language that they could speak. Most of the visitors are English speaking, but also there's the whole issue around keeping people safe because it's a traumatic experience for some people. So always right at the beginning of every tour, it was explained to people very carefully that this was going to be possibly stressful and for some even upsetting. And that went two ways. So first of all, the visitors are told that if you feel unsafe at any point, you know, this is who to talk to, and you can step out of the tour at any point. But also it's explained to them at the beginning that the people who are going to be your tour guides today are people who have had these experiences. And it is the fact that people are talking to people who really have those experiences that we know is what changes people's ideas when they visit. But at the beginning, it's explained to them, please be sensitive to the fact that you're talking to people who are going through this, not just who have gone through this.
Amazing. And the cultural appropriateness of the program inseparable from the cultural appropriateness of the measurement there, which is really interesting. Again, a question for both of you, and I think we'll start with Maria again. Can you share any, what do you think are some emerging, interesting measurement technologies in this space that people are sort of just starting to use or that maybe you've experimented with? And what are your thoughts on them? Any interesting emerging technologies or approaches?
I'm not sure if this is an emerging technology or approach, but we are trying to experiment with measurement in different ways. So one thing that we have, I think I noticed a question pop up. It was about understanding the long-term impact of events. And what I then thought of is different ways of looking at the impact of events through other pieces of research that you might have already done. So for example, in council, every year we do a community satisfaction survey where it's by telephone, and we ask people, you know, how satisfied they are with the services and facilities that that council provides. And in the past, we've just looked at the ones where satisfaction maybe is a bit lower and how we can improve that. And we look at the services that drive satisfaction. When I was asked to speak at this event earlier, I decided to, you know, go back and have another look at this community satisfaction survey and whether I could get more out of it. And one of the interesting things that I found was that when you look at driver analysis and looking at the services that drive satisfaction, events didn't come out as, you know, one of the top drivers, even though satisfaction was quite high. But if you ran another analysis on the data, what you do find is that events are quite important in driving a sense of community and community pride. And it's, you know, great to show kind of the value of events in that way, even if it doesn't, you know, lift our overall satisfaction score. So I guess one of the things that we will look to do more is just making more out of our current pieces of research.
Very cool. And I think that that touches on a question that we had around measuring civic pride and place activation as well. Elizabeth, do you have anything to add to that question? Emerging tools, technologies that you have used or want to use or have some experience with?
Certainly not technologies, but I have found using it's not so new, but it's relatively new, the most significant change approach very useful. And you can use that in a way that's very complex and very deep, or you can use it in a very simple way. And I, some years ago, did an evaluation of the bilingual community educator program at Western Sydney Area Health Service. And people who'd been in the group were being asked, I was interviewing the facilitators of the program, what had they noted about how, you know, what changed for people. And one of the facilitators described to me running into somebody in the street who had been in one of her groups several years before about health. And she asked her what had happened since then and what had changed. And the woman put her hand in her pocket and she brought out cashews. And she said, I've got these in my pocket because of you and because of that course, instead of having, you know, sugar in her pocket. And, you know, that is a significant change. And, you know, when you talk to people about what has changed and you make it very, you know, sort of practical, it can really tell you a lot. So I think, I mean, those are kinds of things that come out when you say to somebody, what's been the change? But that's also something you can quantify. And we did that, you know, you can, once you start codifying what people say and answer to that single question, you start getting really interesting results.
That's cool. Certainly a big fan of the most significant change here. And for anyone else that's interested, check out methods from social research. There's so much that social impact measurement people can learn from looking at the research methods used in the social sciences. I think that's about all the time we have for questions. I'm going to flick it back to Lila to wrap us up and send us off.
Thank you, Aidan. And look, just a massive thank you for everyone for being here today and your interest. I think it's really heartening for our little Western Sydney SIMNA committee around what we can be doing next and how we can serve the community in terms of supporting impact measurement practice. And look, I think, you know, trying to summarise some of the key themes that have come out, I think what's really stood out to me is the importance of keeping community and outcomes as the central point and not going down the rabbit holes of the, you know, of too many different methods, but just keeping that central and finding simple ways to do that measurement work. I think, you know, it's iterative, it's not perfect, it needs revisiting, it needs collaboration to do this work well, and I think that really came through as strongly. And you know that it kind of it's a growing practice and it's evolving. So I think all of that, you know, I've personally have taken out some really great tips and tricks. So thank you both, Maria and Elizabeth, for all the value you've shared with us today. I just wanted to say that you will get an email requesting some feedback about this event. So in terms of our impact measurement for our own events, we'd really love you to fill that out for us. It's really helpful. I'm really aware we couldn't get to all of the questions, and I think what we might do is actually have a look at them and look at what kind of areas you guys are really interested in. It will help us to develop kind of programming and responses that work for you, our community of practitioners. I think the next webinar for SIMNA is on the 2nd of September with CSNet in Brisbane. And this is the lovely group of people behind this webinar today. This is the SIMNA Western Sydney Committee. We'd really love to hear from you anytime. You're very welcome to come and join us as well if you're in Western Sydney. And yes, you know, do become a member, do link up. There's plenty of resources and plenty of people who are really passionate and care a lot about this area and the work that they do, who are willing and able to assist with questions and kind of advise around your journey too. So again, thank you to absolutely everyone. A biggest thanks, of course, to Elizabeth and Maria for sharing everything with us today. It's hugely appreciated. And on that note, I think we'll wrap yous up and we'll have some lunch. Thank you, everyone.